I do hope to give you some really good information about what HEC is doing on the waterfront in order to protect our waterways as well as the communities that live around them. I'm staff attorney and director of water policy, Kim Ferraro. In case you guys don't know who I am, I've been with HEC for about a year. So there's a couple of issues that I'm going to cover today. The first one is a proactive legislative issue that we're going to be working on to reduce the amount of phosphorus in our waterways. Give you a little background about the problem. According to IDEM, our state regulatory agency for the environment, 50 of our natural lakes are impaired for total phosphorus, which represents 44% of all assessed natural lakes in the state. IDEM reports that this excess phosphorus is the leading non-point source pollutant of concern. And unfortunately, phosphorus in water, our phosphorus is like junk food for algae in water. Just a little bit goes a long way. To give you the science that I keep reading about, this is one little quote: a pound of phosphorus in a lake can produce 500 pounds of algae. Pretty crazy. So in the summer, what we've been seeing is that Indiana communities, tourism-related businesses have to cope with the detrimental effects of phosphorus pollution, including that foul, smelly, stinky water nuisance algae blooms, along with more serious fish kills, health threats included from the toxic blue-green algae that we've been seeing. Examples just from this year alone include 16 public swimming beaches with dangerous levels of blue-green algae, our Guides, Morse, and Eagle Creek reservoirs, drinking water resources for about 1 million people in central Indiana, have had elevated blue-green algae counts. 2 dogs died this summer, as well as 2 sustaining liver damage from exposure to blue-green algae after swimming in the Salamone Lake. And as warming temperatures from climate change affect our region, we are going to see this problem getting worse. A major contributor to the phosphorus issue is the fertilizers that we use on our lawns. In fact, our University of Purdue Department of Agronomy found that 87% of our lawns already have an adequate or even high levels of phosphorus in them. In other words, our lawns just don't need more phosphorus to be green. And the more we put on them when they don't need it, it just runs off into our waterways and causes green, nasty, mucky algae to grow in them. I'm a lawyer, not a scientist, by the way. I like to use words like mucky. Judges love that. So, some of you might be asking, I think I got up here last year and talked about the phosphorus issue and some legislation that we were going to be proposing. And we did try to push that. It didn't go very far last year. And in fact, the year before I came on board, they were, not just HEC and our partners, we tried to push for some legislation that would actually restrict the use of phosphorus in lawn fertilizers. Unfortunately, in our legislature, it wasn't received very well. We had some opposition from friends of the Farm Bureau who we're going to be talking to today. And their position on that was that it was a mandate that just didn't seem to sit well with them. But they were quite supportive of the education component of the bill that we were proposing last year and the year before. So we thought about looking at whether other states had tried just an education bill and looked at what other states were doing. And what we found is that 13 other states actually have passed legislation on phosphorus that restrict the use of it. One state, Maine, has an education bill. And in just 1 year, they passed their bill in 2008. By 2009, they had increased the sale of fertilizers that were not containing phosphorus, pea-free fertilizers, by 50% in 1 year, just through education. They also found that 7 out of 8 distributors in the state had shifted their stock to be mostly pea-free fertilizer due to consumer demand. So we found that consumer education works. And that's actually what we're going to try this year. Unfortunately, we've gotten a good response from those that were opponents of this bill last year, including our friends at the Farm Bureau, including our friends with the lawn care industry. What the bill will require is that retailers, big box stores, garden centers, and nurseries have to post a sign, and as well as providing consumer information at the point of sale that will educate people about the impacts of phosphorus on our waterways and the fact that their lawns just don't need it. And so what this does is create opportunities for thousands of teaching moments. So it's a really great opportunity. We know from Maine that it works. And so I hope that each of you throughout the legislative session will learn more about this effort and contact your own legislator to help us push that bill. So now we're going to get to our panel discussion. And that is industrial livestock production. And Fallon is telling me I have 1 minute left to introduce the panel. Fallon is not going to make it. I'm failing. I'm going to talk fast. We have a very large agricultural industry here in Indiana. And to relate this to the climate change issue that we're here for today, I'm going to share with you a few numbers. From the United Nations, we know that the livestock industry is one of the most significant contributors to that problem from every scale, and this is a quote from them, local to global. At the global level, raising and slaughtering animals for food is one of the leading sources of greenhouse gas emissions that accelerate climate change. Internationally, animal agriculture generates 9% of CO2 emissions, 37% of methane emissions, and 65% of nitrous oxide emissions. In the United States, agriculture is not a major source of CO2 emissions, but it is a large source of methane and nitrous oxide emissions, 30% methane emissions and 80% of our nitrous oxide emissions. On a CO2 equivalent basis, these gases account for nearly 15% of GHG emissions in the United States, a fairly significant amount. On the local level, which is really what our panel is going to be talking about, the way we're raising animals for food is having adverse impacts on our waterways, our air, and our communities. Unlike the beautiful bucolic farm settings of the past, our meat, dairy, and poultry are coming from large industrial facilities known as CAPOs or CFOs that concentrate as many animals as possible in one space at the least expense of money, labor, and attention. We have nearly 3,000 of these animal factories in Indiana. This map shows you their location. They are responsible for raising 80% of our livestock, including 870,000 cows, 3.6 million swine, 42 million chickens, hens, and other poultry, and they produce a lot of waste. Compared to humans, they produce 5 times more. To put this into perspective, a single livestock operation with 5,000 pigs is estimated to produce the same amount of raw sewage as a town of 20,000 people. Animals produce significantly more waste than humans, except it's not regulated like human waste is regulated. It's allowed to be stored in open-air lagoons, unlined lagoons, next to surface waters, where oftentimes the manure can leach into groundwater, or the manure lagoons can overflow, and the waste can run into our waterways, thereby promoting bacterial and algal growth, and of course contaminating them with E. coli and other pathogens. As we're going to be discussing on the panel, there are environmental laws that address the water pollution under the Clean Water Act, but there is no such regulation that is helping to address or minimize the air pollution that comes from these factories, including hydrogen sulfide, particulate matter, and ammonia. And we know from studies done around CAPOs that they sometimes exceed the industrial air emission standards set by EPA by significant amounts, yet there is no regulation on those emissions. And this is having a huge impact on people that live nearby. Due to this regulatory gap, a lot of folks are turning to the courts. But when they get to the courthouse, they're finding that there are obstacles.